The sterile, white room was a cage of panic. Elara Vance felt the world narrow to the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside her bed and the searing wave of another contraction that stole her breath. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the bed rail, her body a battlefield she was losing control of. For 9 months, she had prepared for this moment alone, meticulously planning a quiet, dignified entry into motherhood at a small community hospital with a midwife she trusted. But her son had other plans. He had decided to arrive 3 weeks early, in the middle of a citywide transit strike, forcing her into an ambulance and a frantic ride to the nearest, most prestigious, and most intimidating hospital in the metropolitan area, Thorn Tower Medical. A place of gleaming glass and cutting-edge medicine, funded by a fortune she had once been intimately familiar with. "The on-call chief of obstetrics is on his way," a nurse said, her voice a detached hum. "You're in the best hands." Elara barely registered the words. She just wanted it to be over. She wanted her baby safe in her arms. She braced for the next wave, her focus turned inward, a silent prayer on her lips. The door swished open. "Report," a deep, calm voice commanded, a voice that cut through her pain and straight into her past. Her eyes shot open. It couldn't be. Standing there, framed by the doorway, was a man she had spent 5 years trying to forget. He was older, his dark hair touched with distinguished silver at the temples, the youthful arrogance in his jawline settled into an impenetrable mask of authority. He wore immaculate blue scrubs, a stethoscope draped around his neck like a medal. But the eyes, the piercing, intelligent gray eyes that could see right through a person, were the same. They were the eyes of Dr. Julian Thorne. They were the eyes of the billionaire who had broken her heart. And, though he did not know it, they were the eyes of her child's father. He looked at the chart a nurse handed him, his expression a study in professional detachment. Then he looked at her. For a split second, the mask of the world-renowned physician shattered. Recognition flared, followed by a storm of disbelief, confusion, and something else, something that looked unervingly like the ghost of an old hurt. He had thought her a phantom of his past, a closed chapter in a life defined by forward momentum. But now he saw that the story had not ended, it had simply been waiting for its most dramatic turn. He was about to deliver a child whose existence would rewrite everything he thought he knew about his life, and hers. Elara Vance was a woman woven from quiet resilience and the scent of old paper. At 28, her life was a small, carefully curated world centered on the impending arrival of her son. She lived in a third-floor walk-up apartment that was more books than furniture, the air thick with the comforting aroma of chamomile tea and lemon polish. Her days were spent at The Last Chapter, a cozy, independent bookstore downtown, where she was not merely an employee but a beloved fixture. The owner, a kind, motherly woman named Maria, had taken Elara under her wing, ensuring her schedule was light and her teacup was always full. Elara had found a fragile peace in this life, a world away from the one she had fled. 5 years ago, her world had been one of glittering charity galas, private jets, and the suffocating pressure that came with dating Julian Thorne. She had been a scholarship student finishing her master's in literature, and he was the brilliant, driven heir to the Thorne pharmaceutical and technology empire, already making a name for himself as a gifted surgeon. They had met at a university fundraiser, and their connection had been instant and intoxicating. He had been fascinated by her quiet intellect and her seeming indifference to his wealth, and she had been drawn to the vulnerable man she glimpsed beneath the armor of his success. But their love had not been enough to withstand the corrosive influence of his world. His family had viewed her with polite condescension, a temporary diversion. His life was a relentless series of demands that left little room for the simple, shared moments she craved. She began to feel like another beautiful acquisition, her presence in his life more for appearance than for partnership. The final blow came when she overheard his father telling him that a girl with her background was a liability, not an asset. Julian, exhausted and stressed, hadn't defended her with the conviction she needed. He had asked for her patience, for her to understand the pressures he was under. But what she had understood was that she would always be secondary to his legacy. And so, with a broken heart, she had walked away, leaving nothing but a short, simple note, refusing any and all attempts he made to contact her. She had wanted to preserve her dignity, the one thing his money could not buy. 2 months later, she discovered she was pregnant. Telling him was not an option, she refused to let her child be a pawn in a battle of wealth and obligation. This baby would be hers, raised with love, not leverage. Dr. Julian Thorne, at 35, was a man who had conquered his world. His name was synonymous with medical innovation. He had not just inherited a fortune, he had quadrupled it through his own genius in developing groundbreaking neonatal surgical technologies. His life was a testament to precision, efficiency, and control. His penthouse apartment was a marvel of minimalist architecture, a sterile sanctuary of glass and steel high above the city, reflecting the carefully ordered, emotionally sparse landscape of his inner life. He operated on the most fragile of patients with nerves of steel, commanded boardrooms with unassailable logic, and navigated his social obligations with a cool, detached charm. But he was profoundly alone. The emptiness of his success was a truth he only confronted in the deep hours of the night, when the city lights below seemed like a galaxy of distant, unattainable warmth. His guarded nature had been forged years before he met Alara, solidified by a bitter romantic betrayal where a woman he had trusted had manufactured a legal claim in an attempt to secure a piece of his fortune. The experience had left him deeply cynical, layering suspicion over his already demanding personality. When Alara had walked away, a part of him had been devastated, but the cynical, wounded part had whispered that it was inevitable. He believed she, too, had finally been scared off by the life he led or, worse, had left in a calculated move he couldn't decipher. He had buried his confusion and hurt under a mountain of work, building his empire and his professional reputation into an impenetrable fortress. He told himself he didn't need the messy complications of love. He had his work, his legacy. It was enough. It had to be. Until now. The collision in that hospital room was a seismic event. As Julian stood frozen, the chart in his hand feeling like a meaningless prop, the raw, undeniable reality of the situation crashed over him. Alara Vance. Here. In labor. The timeline clicked into place with horrifying, mathematical certainty. 5 years. The baby was full term. His baby. His first, unworthy thought was a flare of the old, deep-seated suspicion. Was this a trap? A meticulously planned confrontation? He dismissed it as soon as it formed. One look at her face, pale with pain and genuine shock, told him this was no scheme. This was fate, in its cruelest and most miraculous form. A senior nurse, Gretchen, a woman who had worked with Julian for years and was fiercely protective of his time and focus, stepped forward. Dr. Thorne, patient is 8 centimeters dilated. Fetal heart rate is stable for now, but she's progressing rapidly. She looked at Alara with a professionally impersonal gaze, seeing only a patient, not the woman who was a ghost from her boss's past. Alara, Julian finally managed to say, his voice strained, stepping closer to the bed. He was no longer the chief of obstetrics, he was just a man staring at the wreckage of his own past. She flinched at the sound of her name on his lips, turning her face away. "I don't want you here," she gasped, her voice tight with pain and a 5-year-old ache. Nurse Gretchen's eyebrows shot up. She gave Alara a stern look. "Ma'am, Dr. Thorne is the best. You are very lucky he was on call." The condescension was subtle but sharp, the kind of dismissive tone reserved for a difficult, ungrateful patient. It was a small humiliation, but it solidified Alara's sense of being powerless, a specimen under the bright, unforgiving lights of Julian's world once again. Julian's gaze hardened, but his anger was not directed at Alara. It was for the nurse, and for himself. "Gretchen," he said, his voice low and sharp, "treat this patient with the utmost respect. Do you understand me?" The nurse's eyes widened in surprise, but she nodded curtly. He turned back to Alara, his professional composure returning like a shield, but his eyes held a new, desperate intensity. Elara, I know this is a shock. We will talk later. I promise. But right now, your life and the life of the baby, are the only things that matter. Please. Let me help you. His plea was not that of a powerful man, but of a desperate one. In that moment, he wasn't a billionaire or a brilliant surgeon. He was a man on the verge of becoming a father, terrified of the responsibility he had never known he had. Through the fog of her agony, Elara saw the raw fear in his eyes. It was an emotion she had never seen him display. The Julian she knew had been all cool confidence and unshakable control. This man was different. He was vulnerable. As he began to work, his hands sure and his commands to the nursing staff precise, he was also conducting a silent investigation. He absorbed every detail of her presence. The simple, inexpensive silver locket around her neck, a gift from her mother. The absence of any designer labels on the folded clothes in the small bag a nurse had brought in. Her medical file listed her occupation as a bookstore clerk and her address as being in a working-class neighborhood he had only ever driven through. This was not the profile of a woman planning a multi-million-dollar ambush. This was the profile of a woman who had built a life for herself, a humble life, completely independent of him. The secret she had kept was not one of malice, but one of pride. He realized with a staggering sense of shame that she had not left him over money or status, she had left because he had failed to give her the one thing she truly needed, his unwavering faith in her, in them. He had let the cynicism of his past poison the best thing that had ever happened to him. And now, the proof of his failure, and of her incredible strength, was fighting its way into the world. The background check his mind was performing was providing an answer he wasn't prepared for. He was the one who had been unworthy. Then the crisis struck. Heart rate is dropping, a young resident called out, his voice tight with alarm. The steady, reassuring beep of the fetal monitor turned into a frantic, terrifying chirp. Nuchal cord, Julian diagnosed instantly, his eyes locked on the ultrasound screen. It's rapped twice. We need to get him out now. The calm efficiency of the room evaporated, replaced by a controlled, palpable tension. This was the catastrophic failure, the moment that all of Julian's wealth, power, and influence could not solve. His private jets could not fly him out of this. His team of lawyers could not file a motion to dismiss it. His fortune could not purchase a different outcome. It all came down to his skill, her strength, and the fragile, flickering heartbeat of their son. Elara cried out, a sound of pure terror. What's happening? Julian moved to her side, taking her hand. His touch was not just that of a doctor, it was an anchor. He had to bridge the 5-year chasm of silence and hurt between them in a single instant. He had to make her trust him. Elara, look at me, he commanded, his voice firm but gentle. The power dynamic had been completely inverted. The billionaire needed something from the bookstore clerk, something more precious than any asset, her trust. I need you to listen to me. Breathe. I need you to push with everything you have on the next contraction. I will guide him out. I will not let anything happen to our son. Do you trust me? It was a humble plea, stripped of all arrogance. In his eyes, she saw not the calculating billionaire, but the terrified father he was about to become. She saw the man she had once loved. She gave a single, determined nod. What followed was a symphony of controlled chaos. Julian became the master at work, his movements economical and precise, his commands to the team clear and direct. He was no longer just a doctor, he was a father fighting for his child's life. Nurse Gretchen and the others watched, mesmerized, as he worked with a focus that was almost supernatural. He was not just using his medical training, he was channeling a primal, desperate need to protect his family. And Elara, drawing on a reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed, became his partner in the fight. She listened, she breathed, she pushed, her entire being focused on his voice guiding her through the storm. They were a team, united by the most profound purpose imaginable. With one final, monumental effort, the baby was born. But he was silent. And blue. A collective gasp filled the room. The second stretched into an eternity as Julian worked swiftly to clear the baby's airway and stimulate his breathing. Elara watched, her heart frozen in her chest. "Come on, son," Julian whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Come on. Breathe for me. Breathe." And then, it came. A weak, sputtering cough, followed by a loud, indignant wail that filled the room with the most beautiful sound in the world. Relief washed over the room in a tidal wave. The nurses cheered softly. Elara sobbed, tears of joy and exhaustion streaming down her face. A nurse gently placed the crying, squirming baby on her chest. He was perfect. Julian stood back, his hands trembling slightly, his composed exterior completely gone. He looked at Elara, her face luminous as she gazed at their son, and the last of his defenses crumbled. The vindication she deserved would not wait. He cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. He looked directly at Nurse Gretchen, then at the rest of the staff who had just witnessed the miracle. "For the record," he began, his voice thick with an emotion no one there had ever heard from him, "I was a fool 5 years ago. A complete fool." He turned his gaze to Elara, and his next words were for her alone, though everyone heard them. "I am so sorry, Elara. For everything." Then, he addressed the room once more, making his public proclamation. "Everyone, I want to introduce you to Elara Vance. She is the strongest woman I have ever known." He paused, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "And she is the mother of my son." Nurse Gretchen's face was a picture of stunned comprehension. In that moment, Elara was no longer just another patient. She was the woman who held the legendary Dr. Thorne's past and future in her hands. She had been vindicated. A few days later, Julian entered Elara's private hospital room. The room was filled with flowers he had sent, but she seemed barely to notice them, her attention focused entirely on the small, sleeping bundle in her arms. She looked up as he entered, her expression wary but no longer hostile. He carried a leather briefcase. He sat down, placing it on the table with a soft click. "Elara, we need to talk about the future." He opened the case and pulled out a sheaf of documents, thick with legal clauses. "My lawyers have drawn these up. There's a trust fund for our son. A substantial one. It will set him up for life. And this," he said, sliding another document across, "is the deed to a house in a quiet, gated community. It's near the best schools. It has a garden. And this is a proposal for a personal stipend. You would never have to work again." It was the quintessential Billionaire's solution. A clean, contractual, financial fix for a messy, emotional reality. He was offering her a gilded cage, a life of luxurious security. He was offering her everything he thought she could possibly want. Elara looked at the papers, then back at his face. She saw the earnestness there, but she also saw that he still didn't fully understand. She gently rocked their son, whose name they had quietly agreed upon the day before, Leo. "I don't want your money, Julian," she said softly, but with unshakable resolve. He was stunned into silence. "But, this is for Leo. For his security." "Leo's security isn't a number in a bank account," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "It's a father who is present. It's a mother who is respected, not employed. I left you because I didn't want to be an accessory to your life. I will not come back to be your dependent." It was her purpose-driven counteroffer. She was not declining him, she was modifying the terms of their relationship from a transaction to a partnership. "I don't want a house you bought. I want to help build a home. I don't want a stipend. I want a partner. Leo doesn't need your fortune. He needs his father." Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. He looked from the legal documents, which suddenly seemed insulting and cold, to her determined, hopeful face. He finally understood. Her hidden genius was not just her resilience, but her profound moral clarity. She saw the world in terms of value, not price. In a single, decisive movement, he gathered the papers, tore them in half, and dropped them into the wastebasket. It was his shocking decision, the one that would change everything. It was the act of a man surrendering control to embrace connection. "You're right," he said, his voice husky. "You've always been right." He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time in 5 years, not as a complication or a responsibility, but as his equal, his anchor. "Let's build a home, Elara. Together." Their new partnership began tentatively. Julian moved out of his sterile penthouse and, with Elara, they found a warm, sprawling family house with a large, sun-drenched yard. The first few months were a clumsy dance of rediscovery. The brilliant surgeon who could perform miracles on infants was utterly baffled by the mechanics of a diaper. The billionaire CEO learned to function on 3 hours of sleep, finding more fulfillment in Leo's first smile than he ever had in a successful stock market flotation. He saw Elara in her element, not as the intimidated girl in his high society world, but as a confident, loving mother whose quiet wisdom constantly humbled him. 6 months after Leo's birth, Julian made another decision. He called a press conference, and with Elara by his side, he announced the formation of a new, multi-billion-dollar charitable organization, the Elara Vance Foundation. Its mission was to provide comprehensive support for single and underprivileged mothers, offering everything from elite prenatal care and secure housing to educational grants and career training. He told the assembled reporters that his life's greatest work had not been in an operating theater or a boardroom, but in learning what true strength was from the woman standing beside him. He named her the foundation's executive director, not as a symbolic gesture, but because he knew her compassion and integrity were its most vital assets. Years passed. The foundation flourished, changing thousands of lives. Nurse Gretchen, humbled and inspired, became one of its most dedicated volunteer coordinators. Maria, from the bookstore, served on its community outreach board. Julian and Elara's partnership deepened into a profound and abiding love, built on a foundation of mutual respect they had never had before. They were often found on weekends not at galas, but in the park, pushing Leo on the swings. One afternoon, Julian, watching Elara laugh as their son toddled unsteadily toward her, felt a sense of peace he had once believed was impossible. He had spent his life accumulating wealth, power, and accolades, believing they were the measure of a man. But he had been wrong. He looked at Elara, her face alight with love, and at their son, the living embodiment of their second chance. He realized then that his greatest fortune was not stored in a vault or traded on an exchange. It was right here, in the simple, extraordinary warmth of a family he had almost lost. True worth was never about what you owned, it was about what you were willing to build, who you were willing to trust, and the love you were brave enough to accept.